Hey everyone, welcome back to Empty Chairs. My name is Justin, and today I'm going to be doing a reaction video to a video by Father Mike Schmitz and Dr. Scott Hahn talking about how to talk about homosexuality within the Catholic Church. Now, these are two people that I grew up, especially in college, and when I was a missionary, kind of reading all of Dr. Scott Hahn's books. He is a theologian. He's a professor at the University of Steubenville. Father Mike Schmitz, he is a campus chaplain, but does a ton of work doing talks all across the country, speaking at different parishes, and he's kind of, I feel like, become known as the priest that talks about homosexuality. He's given talks, he's written a book, and so these were really people that I looked up to for so many years, really trusted their opinions. So these aren't just kind of random people that I'm reacting to on the internet. These are a lot of people that I've engaged with for years. And actually, for Father Mike Schmitz, I actually got to work with him for a couple days when I was a Focus missionary working at one of the Sikh conferences. And he's a great guy. I know he's a genuine, nice guy. So this isn't just some random person on the internet for me. So let's get started.
So share with us, because you've written a book about this, how is it that you would encourage people to bear witness to family members, to friends, to neighbors who are dealing with this sort of SSA, same-sex attraction, but also dealing with a church that is saying, you need to be redeemed from sin just like those you call straight, and the world that says you need to embrace this as your identity, as what defines your identity. How do you speak to that?
That's a good question.
Okay, so I'm going to even stop right there before we even get to Father Mike Schmitz's reaction here, because I think that this question sets up a false dichotomy I see in so many Catholics right now. Because, right, Dr. Scott Hahn, he's saying on one hand, you either embrace what the church's teachings, or the world says you embrace this as your entire identity. And, I'm somebody who has been out for almost 10 years now. I know a ton of people who are Catholic, who are LGBT. I know just a lot of people who are out in the world, right, your secular people who are LGBT. And I really I cannot think of a single person who is LGBTQ where that's their whole identity. I genuinely cannot think of a single person I've ever met where that is their whole identity. So I just think that that's a talking point to make it seem like, oh, it's us versus the world. They're making this whole identity. And I think that's a talking point and is not reflective of individuals who know real people who are LGBT. Okay?
One of the things that can happen, especially in our cultural context right now, is we group people together by group, or we treat individuals as groups.
Identity politics.
Yeah. Right, exactly. In that sense of, that's why it's hard to get a talk to people and say, some of you might be struggling with X, Y, or Z, or same-sex attraction in this case, as opposed to talking with an individual and saying, hey, tell me about your life.
Right.
Just tell me.
Okay, sounds super pastoral, right? But don't we have World Youth Day? Don't we have I don't know, this is kind of niche, but the Pope has written a letter to artists. We have the Congregation for Education from the Vatican. We think about crisis pregnancy centers. We have all of these times where we're engaging a specific group of people, and we don't think twice about it, right? We have marriage prep. We have all of these things in the church where we are talking about a group that's within the church, and that's okay. That's normal. For whatever reason, he's pushing back against this when it comes to LGBT people. I don't know why. Okay?
Tell me about, and I've always felt this way. Okay, keep talking. You're not alone. And I think that sometimes when we just group people together, we devalue or dehumanize, depersonalize the message of God's grace. We also, depersonalize the high call. Even let's say like this, even before that, when someone keeps getting the message that you don't belong, or when someone keeps hearing, even if they're not saying this, but they're hearing, I'm different, then what happens is there can become this kind of sense of, whenever you're talking, I hear us and them. Right. I just keep hearing this. So even right now, here, as you mentioned, two heterosexual men talking about this, well, hear us, the heterosexual men, talking about them, the homosexual men or women. And it's well, no, the first starting point has to be, this is us. And as you mentioned, concupiscence being the key, because I remember I might have included this in.
So, Father Mike Schmitz, come on, you're better than this. So, he's talking about concupiscence here. This is something he brings up a lot in his talks. And this is just not actually fully representing what the church teaches here, because we know from church documents, this is way back in the 1980s when Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, wrote about a document to bishops about the pastoral care of homosexual persons. And in that document, it says very clearly the experience of same-sex attractions is not itself sinful. And so I think that so often this all gets wrapped up of this is sinful, concupiscence, all these things. No, this is just a part of people's experience. Why are we immediately jumping to the sin question? If we're going to be talking about sin, we have to start talking about actions, not a part of what makes a person, right? We wouldn't say that the fact that somebody's straight and is attracted to the same sex, that is inherently a problem with concupiscence. we'd have to talk about things about like lusting after another person and things like that. So why are we immediately jumping to like sin when we're talking about people who experience same-sex attraction? Come on, Father Mike.
I've written, because it was so powerful. Heard the story of a man, and this is my story as well, with some people close to me. The story of this man whose friend had come out to him and said, I'm gay, and their friend's response was, well, if it wasn't this, it'd be something else. Sure. And he's like, well, no, I mean, this is the thing that identifies me. He's like, no, this is a reality that you're experiencing. But if it wasn't this, it'd be some other thing, because you came out and said this is one of your issues, one of the burdens, one of the experiences you have in your life that makes it difficult to follow Jesus, or makes it difficult to grow in virtue, whatever the thing is. But I have a half dozen of my own in that sense of
this is the other big talking point, right? If it wasn't this, it was something else. We're all sinners, right? I've got my own proclivities for how I sin. I understand how this feels so compassionate, and I think this makes Catholics feel like, yes, I'm relating to someone who is LGBT. We are on the same page. I am building bridges. Okay, I have heard Father Mike Schmitz speak on this topic so many different times, and he gives different examples. He talks about different sins or whatever. I understand that he sees how his sin and his struggle with sin is similar to what he thinks LGBT people are like. For me, as somebody who's gay, I have never once experienced what Father Mike Schmitz is talking about and felt like I have heard my story in his, right? I understand he sees his life in mine. I don't see my life reflected in his. And so if we're going to be talking about building bridges, about having conversation and dialogue, then it has to be a two-way street. And just because it feels nice, it feels like it lands for Catholics, doesn't mean it actually does, right? Just because something feels good doesn't mean it's right or it's true. So I understand this is a really nice talking point, but it's not actually helpful, at least in my life. And I think for so many other LGBT people, that's not something that for me actually builds bridges, okay?
It's us, because we're all in the same boat. There's no temptation that's not common to all men. That's right. That sense of being. So I think the starting point, individuals talking to the person, listening to the person, and then be able to say definitively and again, it's not about us and them. It's about us. It's all us. And then the second thing I think would be is the difference between a person's identity and a person's experience. Because I think we can so quickly, in some areas, conflate experience with identity. But I think about, would you say, here's someone who experienced abuse when they were a child, or abuse when they were adolescent, or as a young adult. That was a horrible experience that they're tempted to say, that's me. I'm the abused. I'm a victim. I am used up. I am worthless because of this experience. And who wouldn't step into that person's life and say, no, you're not defined by your experience. You're more than this. But when it comes to some behaviors or some attractions or some whatever, folks are very willing to quickly jump to and say your experience equals your identity. And I think it's really helpful to separate those two.
I guess I can say I don't understand it when I spoke like this for so long. So I'm probably just mad at my former self here. But okay, so it was like, okay, identity, experience, all these things. We don't want labels. Can we take a moment to take note of how often we do use labels as Catholics? Because if we're going to say, hey, the church teaches that the experience of having same-sex attractions is not itself sinful, it's just part of my experience in life, okay? So I also might say, hey, someone might be a redhead, or I'm a brunette, or I have blue eyes, right? It's just part of what makes me me. But we also are totally fine with people saying oh, I'm a priest, I'm a teacher, I'm a youth pastor, I'm a missionary. We use all of these labels, and we understand when people use them that it doesn't make it their whole identity. But for somebody who's a priest, somebody who's I'm a husband, I'm a spouse, we understand that that's a significant part of what makes them them. But even for Father Mike Schmitz, a priest, he has been ontologically changed. We know that is still not his entire identity. So if we can take that for so many other parts of how we talk about the Catholic Church, why can't we trust LGBT people when we say, hey, this isn't my whole identity? And maybe you have heard LGBT people say, this is all, this is the entirety of who I am. But let me say for myself and for the hundreds and hundreds of conversations that I've had with friends, with people that I get to meet online, that so many of us are saying, hey, I'm gay, this is part of who I am, but being gay is not my whole identity. So maybe let's stop using this straw man, Catholics.
And I think it's really helpful to separate those two.
You're making some really important distinctions. I'm reminded of St. Jose Maria. I became a cooperator in Opus Dei a year before I became a Catholic, because I never heard of spiritual direction. Once I discovered who doesn't need this, But, he made a point, and I'm going to paraphrase it, and that is, it's not that we're trying to reach them. We are them, right? And we need to be reached every bit as much as they do, because we are them. And I think if we remember that, we recognize then conversion is something that I need every day. It's ongoing. It's lifelong, but it has to be daily. Some days it's more difficult than others. Some days I'm more deceived and trapped in things than I realize. And so I might need to be jolted awake or whatever. But it seems to me that this is also where we, not just as teachers, but as witnesses, can point to this. I also remember watching a video with St. Jose Maria of him, where he was addressing a husband and a father who was asking him about, you're a priest, I've got sons, and, and St. Jose Maria said something like this, for you, and me, it's not that different. for you, it's one woman and no other, and for me, it's none. You know,
Right.
but I mean,
Only one difference.
you could tell this guy had heard confessions. You know,
Yeah.
and so he knew. Well, it isn't like, you know, matrimony just gives you that outlet that makes it easy. No, we're sons of Adam. We're daughters of Eve. We are them.
Okay, so I want to point, like, you can kind of see them lighting up as they're giving these examples here of like, oh my gosh, yes, you know, he's talking about St. Jose Maria Escriva, you know, and this married person. We've got this modeled right here. We've got the priest and the married person. It's like, yes, I understand these examples and this resonates with me. All right, I'm this like third person observing here. I'm the gay person. They're talking about my experience. This is not landing for me, okay? I understand what they're talking about. I understand how this is connecting for them, but this is one of those great examples of like, yes, this lands for them. This lands for their experience. And if we're going to say it's not us and them, like we are all the church, this is all our process of conversion, then I would invite Catholics and I would invite Dr. Scott Hahn and Father Mike Schmitz to say, okay, let's listen to the stories of LGBT people. If it really is just us, then why can't you use examples of LGBT people, you know, in your talks here, in your conversations here? Why are we only hearing stories about people, you know, about priests, about married individuals? Like where are the examples of people who experience same-sex attractions, right? Why are these stories nowhere to be found? And I think this is like honestly a little bit broader of a problem within the church. I remember one time I was at Mass, and this was a parish that has a pretty large like single population, a lot of young adults that go there in their 20s and 30s, you know, looking for a spouse. And there's also a number of families there. I'm not sure exactly the makeup, but let's say it's at least 50-50 families and single people. And I was sitting at this, you know, in Mass, listening to the homily, and the priest was giving example after example after example, and he's known for his like, you know, 30, 40-minute homily, so this wasn't just like a quick 15-minute thing. But all of the examples in his homily were related to married couples and married life. And this was not a homily about marriage. It was a homily about, you know, loving your neighbor and what that looked like. And I was just so confused as I was sitting there in the church, because like this is a priest who loves his congregation, who knows the people in his church. We know, you know, as a single person, I could certainly like listen to that homily and glean some truth from it, understand the similarities between married life and my own situation. But like, how much easier is it to listen to the story of somebody whose journey is similar to mine? How much easier would it have been to hear an example in the context of many in that homily of a single person and what that looked like to love their neighbor? And I don't understand why we can't bring that to a broader sense in the church. It's not enough just to say, oh, you should, you know, you as a gay person should be able to understand why your story is similar to a priest or your story is similar to a married couple. Why can't we also bring in examples of LGBT people, especially from people like me who are saying these examples just don't land?
Our sexuality from the dawn of history has always been disordered, and not slightly, and not just in adolescence, but it's a continuous type of thing. And this is why rediscovering concupiscence, in Romans 7 especially, when I was working on this commentary on Romans, I began to recognize that why is Romans 8 my favorite chapter? Well, it's not just because the Holy Spirit is mentioned 18 times more than the previous 7 chapters. It's because the Holy Spirit alone can deliver us from becoming self-worshiping, self-centered wretches, you know. And that's what Paul's describing himself in Romans 7, 18 through 23 and all of the rest. But again, more than scripture, more than doctrine, this is a lived experience that we have to get through, but we have to share as we're doing this. And it seems to me that this is so much a part of why people need priests who can speak the truth. One last thought I have before I'm going to turn another question at you. In the Catholic tradition, we use this expression, we distinguish to unite. You know, we distinguish the human nature and the divine nature of Jesus to show how they're united in his personhood, as son. We distinguish nature and grace. We distinguish reason and faith, but to show how there is a nuptial unity. Marriage doesn't make unity easy. It makes it possible. Some days just barely, you know, in my home. But it seems to me that the world says we distinguish to separate, and then we separate to oppose, and then we oppose to divide and conquer. Yeah. And it's just the air you breathe. It's toxic, but it...
Yes. So I understand what he's saying here, and I would agree with this initially, right? So if the only reason why we're bringing up differences between us and other people is to separate individuals, if the only point of bringing up our differences is to cause division, then that is unhelpful, right? That is not something good and we want. But I think he brings up some examples that are undermining the point that he's saying here, because he's saying, you know, we highlight the differences between Jesus' humanity and his divinity, and we highlight those differences because there's something to understand about each one of those things. And in the same way, when we bring about the differences that exist in different populations and different communities in the church, we're not bringing about those differences to cause division, but to highlight the importance of each of those groups and each of those communities. right? So there's a reason why we, you could even think religious orders, right? We have this distinction within the church. We're separating these different groups of people because like each of these different religious communities have a different charism that is a contribution to the church. And we don't see that division as something that is separating us, but ultimately is a beautiful thing that highlights, not the uniformity of the church, but the broader unity of the church. And so for whatever reason, whenever it comes to the question of LGBT people and this understanding that, hey, actually, LGBT people have a unique experience within the Catholic Church, that yes, there might be some similarities that people want to draw between, unmarried single women, between priests, that might exist. There's also something that's unique to LGBT individuals. In the same way that there might be some similarities between different religious orders, there's also something unique that each of them has, a unique struggle, a unique charism that each of these communities has. And so instead of dismissing the call and the need to address what it's like for LGBT Catholics and saying, hey, we're all the same, we're Catholic, why are we bringing up these divisions? Why can't we understand that by bringing up this unique population that we can understand how better to care for, to love, and to include LGBT people into our churches, okay? Unity over uniformity.
It almost has a pleasant, or at least an odorless quality. And I think that we as Catholics have got to not only discover our weaknesses in new ways in order to appreciate God's strength in new ways, but turn around and admit that with a joyful, honest humility.
Right.
It's liberating.
Yeah.
It isn't an effective rhetorical strategy. It's the only way we'll pass a polygraph at the end of each day and pass into heaven when we're judged.
Well, it seems like, I don't know if this is exactly where you're going with this too, but even based off this topic of same-sex attraction, and one thing I have noticed when it comes to the men and women that I've spoken with who have been open to hearing the Lord's word, they're open to hearing that God loves you. We don't think you're gross. You're not them. You're us. This is all of us. Is this something rises up in so many of them when we start talking about the call to being a saint, right? And the call to be that recognition of at some point there will be someone who it's known that they experience same-sex attraction.
No, Father Mike Schmitz. No, I have to stop you here. Okay, so we're waiting for that first saint who experienced same-sex attractions. No, we're not. And I remember hearing, him say things like this when I was in college, when I was a missionary, and it was like, that's going to be me. I am going to be, the first saint with same-sex attractions. And I'm just going to write about it in my journal. I am going to suffer in silence. I'm going to maybe share this with just a few people. But then I'm going to live this good and holy life. And then I'm going to die, and they're going to discover my journal, and they'll publish it like Saint Faustina or Saint Therese of Lisieux. And then I will be the first same-sex attracted saint. And it was only after I came out and I, started to kind of engage with some more Catholics that are, quote, liberal, to put an unhelpful label on people, that people are like, oh no, we've already had saints who experience same-sex attractions, And some of these are, we have no way of knowing. Like St. Sergius and Bacchus, they're like saints from, I think, the 3rd or 4th century, to Roman soldiers who were martyred for their faith. And there's just kind of this vague assumption that maybe they were a gay couple. We don't know. But we do have people like St. John Henry Newman. You have like Henry Nouwen and Father Michael Judge, who are both, their causes for canonization are both moving forward. And so, we've got like St. Sebastian is often, held up as a queer icon as well. And so I don't understand where this is coming from, because we do have, especially Henry Nouwen, we have people that he came out to, it is written about in his journal. And so why, Father Mike Schmitz? Why are you saying we're waiting for that first same-sex attracted saint? Because under his logic here, right, we don't want to make, same-sex attraction our whole identity, right? So why are we waiting for a saint whose whole identity is same-sex attraction? Why can't we just take somebody, following his logic, why can't we hold up somebody like St. John Henry Newman, who has been declared a doctor of the church, right? Who is known for now his contribution to church theology in a profound way, who also happened to be attracted to men? Why are we not holding them up as examples and instead making this a saint where that's their whole identity, right? So, and it's just this weird thing where he talks about people can't come out. So why would somebody not be able to come out when they're alive, but we can out them when they're dead? This is not helpful or healthy theology.
That they experience same-sex attraction and they're a canonized saint and their faithfulness. And we assume that in the 2,000 years of the church.
We don't have to assume. We know. We literally know, Father Mike. We're good.
And that sense of I could be that. I could be that woman. It resonates with so many people, because that's the sense of, I'm not disqualified. That this brokenness that I experienced, thank be to God, because the brokenness I experienced could disqualify me. If yours disqualifies you, then mine does.
And I think the other thing too is it gives people with same-sex attraction in the church like a sense of purpose, right? Like if you understand that this is part of your life, and you're like, I am following 110% what the church teaches here, and you understand that, hey, I've got these attractions, these aren't going anywhere, then you will know that for most dioceses and most religious orders, this would disqualify you from, again, joining a religious order, becoming a priest. It would disqualify you from getting, married to somebody of the opposite sex. And so it's this question of like, well, what is my purpose in life? What am I supposed to do? We know in a lot of ways that even if you're following the teachings of this church, that there is so much apprehension around people with same-sex attractions that's going on here. Especially in the wake of the priestly abuse scandals that have happened and this false association with people who experience same-sex attraction and abuse, that there's a lot of wariness if this is coming out, for an individual, like, well, we don't really know if we want you to be, in ministry or working with these specific populations. And so I think, for me, as somebody who is discerning my vocation and understanding what I should do, me becoming a saint was like, well, that's my vocation. That's my purpose in life. And maybe part of what Father Mike Schmitz is saying in kind of avoiding those other saints is he kind of knows that this helps to give people with same-sex attraction a sense of purpose in life, something they're living for more than themselves. Because I think we know deep down, for somebody who has so many vocations of no in the church, it's really difficult and really lonely. And everybody does have a mission and a purpose and something that is supposed to be contributing to the church. So, yeah, it makes people feel good. But I'm sorry, we've already had same-sex attracted saints.
Qualifies me for sure, but I'm not disqualified. The Lord doesn't look at me with disgust. He looks at me with love. He rejoices every time I come back to him, even after I've fallen. Like all the grace that he won for us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is accessible to every human being, regardless of whatever concupiscence they're experiencing, whatever kind of fall they have. And that kind of thing, I think, when we lose sight of the reality of original sin, when we lose sight of the effects of concupiscence, then the gospel makes no sense. So the gospel is just a burden.
Okay, I think just the last thing I want to add here is you'll note like this entire video, all right, we're talking about essentially, you could say, they didn't say it though, but it's like, what is the call to holiness for people who experience same-sex attraction? And so much of this was like overcoming your same-sex attraction, right? This is concupiscence. And even though it is not church teaching that you have to become straight, to be a saint, it is not church teaching that part of your path to holiness is becoming straight. It is implied with videos like this, where we're talking about you need to overcome this, right? This is your cross. This is your struggle. And if this really is just part of your life, if the experience of having same-sex attractions is not itself sinful, then why aren't we just talking about the call to holiness, like very generally? Why aren't we just talking about, okay, how are you learning to love? What are the ways that you are sinning? Of like being impatient with people, being lying, stealing, whatever it is that your tendency to sin is. Why aren't we talking about that instead of something that is merely a part of someone's experience here? So, oh man, I just think that Dr. Scott Hahn, Father Mike Schmitz, you could do so much better. I think that we could recognize so many of the saints that are part of our church's tradition already, who are, thought to be experience same-sex attractions, thought to be LGBT. I think that would provide such a model of hope and such a greater witness instead of this false narrative that we're still waiting for our first gay saint. So to anybody who's watching this who, maybe experiences same-sex attraction, identifies as LGBT, I would just want to ask you, like, do these examples really resonate with your experience? Like, does this actually capture what it's like for you to have your experience, to have this be part of who you are? And then just to remind you to not fall into this trap that they are saying here, that this is your whole identity, that this defines who you are, because we know that this is just part of us. This is part of what makes us us. And by saying that you're LGBT, by accepting that this is part of your life, that isn't making it your whole identity. It's just accepting a significant part of your life, something that influences how you show up in the world, how you engage with other people. But we know for us as LGBT individuals that this isn't our whole identity, and we need to push back when we hear false narratives like this. And I think finally to note that, as Father Mike Schmitz has already said, we know that the church does have a long history of people in our churches who were LGBT. We're not waiting for that example. We're not waiting for some person who's going to die and leave us a journal about what their struggle was like with people who experience same-sex attractions. We are already here. We have been a part of the church, we are a part of the church, and we will be a part of the church. So you're right, it's not us and them. And this whole talk of diversity should not be to erase the differences, but for LGBT people to understand that there is a unique experience for us in the church that the church has yet to truly listen to and engage with. And until that happens, I'll be here.